Okay, thank you for coming. I'd say that was exciting, but it's the Midwest. This is what happens in the Midwest. Welcome to the final Visual Voices lecture for the Spring 23 series. Please switch your phones, put your phones on silent. Please put your laptops away just for a minute. As always, a huge thank you to Illinois Arts Council for supporting the Visual Voices series and all gallery events and activities. Kerry Grady is an American entrepreneur, designer, educator, author, and humanitarian. He is best known as the founding principal of Grady Campbell, a leading strategic brand agency established in 1989 that plans, designs, and produces customized, multidimensional solutions for a wide range of clientele. As the firm's owner, brand strategist, and design director, Kerry sets the tone for the creative and strategic work that Grady Campbell produces for its clients, always emphasizing the firm's commitment to helping them build their culture, their business, and their brand value. His talent and acumen is a unique blend of a strong design aesthetic and a deep understanding of business strategy. Kerry's expertise includes strategic planning, design, visual identity, brand development, advertising, print communications, web and digital media packaging, sign systems, and film. For more than 40 years, Kerry has been a trusted advisor to business leaders and entrepreneurs. His experience spans all aspects of design, branding, and marketing, and he has created, refreshed, and implemented successful brand programs for hundreds of clients, including Swatch, Motorola, Morningstar, the University of Chicago, the Harris Theatre, IBM, and the Museum of Contemporary Art. While Kerry's clients are primarily based in the United States, he has worked with businesses in Germany, Portugal, the United Arab Emirates, India, South Korea, and the United Kingdom. Well known in the design profession, Kerry's work is recognized by some of the world's most prestigious design journals and organizations, including the American Institute of Graphic Arts, the American Center for Design, Graphis, the New York Art Directors Club, Idea Magazine, and the United Kingdom Design Council. There was a German one in there as well, which I couldn't pronounce.
Novographic.
Kerry has served as Associate Professor of Design to the University of Illinois, the Art Institute of Chicago, and Northern Illinois University, and as a guest presenter for the American Photographers Association. He's a member of the Chicago Economics Club and has served as a board member to a number of professional and philanthropic organizations. The release of his book, From Pencil to Mouse, 40 Years of Graphic Design, is both reflective and instructive and provides his insights to the professional practice of graphic design. Kerry illustrates his ideas with examples of his own work throughout the pages of the book, while addressing such topics as growing up in Iowa, working at Container Corporation of America, the criteria for good design, Swiss modernist design influences, how technology has impacted the progress of design, and the relationship between design and client. From Pencil to Mouse, 40 Years of Graphic Design is the first and only collection of Kerry Grady's design work. Tonight's lecture will be an interview format with time for audience Q&A at the end, so please have some good questions to call out for Kerry. Our interviewer for the evening is my good colleague, Jae Chae, and so without further ado, please welcome our visual voice guest for tonight, the final series, Kerry Grady.
Thank you.
Hi, Kerry.
Hi, Jay.
So, first of all, I want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for coming to this lecture and willing to speak with us about some of your expertise and your experiences. And instead of just making this interview the way I wanted to make this interview and asking some of the questions or burning questions that I have, I actually asked some of my students to come up with some of the questions, right? So tonight, I am going to go by some of the lists that my students have asked, and there's actually two parts that I think most of you guys wanted to kind of find out about Kerry is how he is thinking. You know, what are some of the things that he's thinking? And what are some of the thinking that he's doing or involved nowadays? So those are the two major umbrella topics that we will be discussing or having a conversation and dialogue today. All right, so without any further ado, we want to ask him, could you tell us how you developed your art career so far? So give us some background so that we as a student can understand where you're coming from.
And thanks for all of you to come in. I drove in from Chicago this morning so I could be here today because it matters. So thanks for showing up. So I like to talk, so the stories get kind of long, but I'll try to cut to the chase here. I grew up in Iowa. I was born in Iowa in the Quad Cities. Most of you are probably familiar with it. A place called Muscatine, Iowa. My family lived in that same 20-year radius for generations. There wasn't a designer in a lot of them. Basically blue-collar people, simple, quality, value-driven people. And I grew up in a wonderful time and environment where I was supported whatever I wanted to do. I got the encouragement that I needed to give it a try. And one of the things that I did fairly well was I could draw as a kid. So I was recognized by that in the community as friends and family. They said, give him a piece of paper, see what he can do. And, I could do it well enough that it got some support or acknowledgement. And so that was one of the paths that kind of took me towards design, even though I didn't really realize it. As a young man, as a young person, I thought, well, maybe I'll, be a cartoonist or something. And this is when Disney was just kind of, flourishing. I thought, well, maybe I'll work for Walt Disney someday, and I'll do cartoons and animations and things. I didn't know what else, would be the option. And as I went through high school, even though I had lots of different interests, including sports and writing and theater and everything else, I was kind of drawn to cartooning and maybe editorial cartooning because I liked the idea that you had a point of view, you were kind of aware of opinion or current events, and you could embellish or even take a position with humor. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll do that, but I didn't really want to be a cartoonist because they're strange. And in fact, one of my best friends is a cartoonist, and basically you're in your room most of your lifetime drawing characters that you think are your friends, but they're really just pretend. So I wasn't like that siloed in my thinking, so I thought, I don't know if I want to do that. And my mother worked for a furniture company, and they made office furniture in my hometown. And she said, well, maybe you should talk to John. He's a product designer, and maybe he could help you decide what to do or where you want to go to school, because no one else could help me. They thought advertising, go into advertising, whatever that meant. But anyway, I talked with this guy named John, and he said, well, do you like this? Do you like that? And he said, well, have you ever heard of graphic design? And I'm thinking, I have no idea what that is. Is it designing graphs? And he's like, well, no, it's this and that. So go to the University of Illinois. They have a good program. I used to go to school there, and see what you think. So I thought, sure. So I'm curious enough, and I think, by the way, that's what I would want to share with all of you. Be curious, give it a try. Listen, explore it. So I drove down to Champaign, and I checked it out, and I thought, yeah, that sounds good. I still didn't know exactly what this was, but I took a shot at it. And my first experience of graphic design was I signed up for all the wrong classes, first of all, because I went to a community college because I couldn't afford to go more than that, beyond that. And they said that some of my classes transferred and I would get credit for it. They were wrong. So I got to Illinois and they said, oh, you got all the wrong classes. And I'm thinking, I quit. I'm done. All my friends are at Iowa. I'm the only one at Illinois. I'm in all the wrong classes a month in. I don't know what's happening here, but it's not happy. But I got the list of books for the design classes, and the first one was typography. Didn't know what that was. But the book that I bought changed everything. So I'm looking at this like, what is this? And I loved it. I didn't even know what it was, but I related to it. And I was fortunate to have good teaching. By the way, I fixed the problem. I got in all the right classes with some help. I was already 2 weeks, 3 weeks behind. So there was some pressure, but it's like, figure it out. That was how I was raised, figure it out. And I did, but those early experiences in design really opened my eyes and it got me excited about it. It was the right fit for me, but I had no idea. And a lot of our choices are, I think, kind of random. You know, you have to kind of go with what you know and be curious enough to find out if you're right or not. And if you're bold enough to stretch, make that stretch, which I was scared to death, because, you know, the University of Illinois was 36,000 students. My hometown is about 30,000 people, not 30 people. So I'm going like, wow, this world it's exciting, but it's also kind of scary and intimidating. I want to be with my friends. But those lessons have taught me to always stretch and always think and say yes or maybe, or I'll come back to you. Don't say no, I don't do that. And those opportunities have continued to pay off for me. So I want to be in Chicago and you know, pursue design, and you learn along the way. I would always show up for something like this to hear what someone had to say. May agree, may not, but something always came out of it. So, and you know, why I'm here today is because I get as much from the experiences as I give. So, kind of by instinct, it ended up, I started to pursue design, and it was always a good fit for me because it does allow me to work and explore.
The immediate danger has passed. Please stand by for your next course of action.
Don't you feel better?
The immediate danger has passed. Please stand by for your next course of action. The immediate danger has passed. Please stand by for your next course of action.
What's the next course?
Clearly, it hasn't passed.
Please stand by for your next course of action. The immediate
Everyone, repeat after her.
stand by for your next course of action. The
Immediate? Oh, okay. That's right. So here's the thing, that was all planned, because what I told you was the immediate danger was do not do that. Don't do what he did. But anyway, so design, I still love what I do. It's changed a lot. But what I love most about it is I get to interact with lots of different people and ideas, and it's a cross-pollination of artistic and business and, you know, all of these things. And I like that. I like to pivot into, you know, it's language, it's visual, it's functional. And we had an experience today in the classroom, which I'm still talking about, right? Which had nothing to do with design really, but it was a great idea. So anyway, I don't know if that.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, Kerry, you had a very successful over 4 decades of owning your own agency and doing successful graphic design. What was one of your dream projects from those long, successful years?
Well, my favorite experience, my favorite projects were like I wasn't qualified for. And when someone would step in and say, you know, we know you did that and we know you did this, but have you ever done what we're doing? And I would think, no. But again, I can draw on those experiences. And thankfully, whoever that client might be or that advocate might be, didn't know anyone else to go to. So they're in a situation where it's like, well, I trust him. I mean, Kerry seems like a stand-up guy. He has done some quality work. So let's see what he can do. A few examples were, I was a graduate student and drawing editorial cartoons for the paper, trying to pay a few bills, doing a few odd jobs here and there. And one of my faculty members was a consultant for an architect. And he came to me and he said, look, they're embarking on a major project. They're going to build a new hospital and they need someone to do the sign plan. I think you should do it. I thought, I have no experience. We never talked about that in any class. Why would you think I do it? He said, oh, you know, because you're good, you know. And he didn't want it. It was over his head. And he said, I just think you'd be a good fit for them. So I said, okay. And it's a little intimidating again, you know, right? I think, well, I'll just, you know, figure it out. I'm sure I'll work under, you know, an architect that knows what he or she's doing, and I'll do the type, you know, figure that out. And I said, well, what should I charge? And he told me what he charged. And he said, why don't you charge 40% of that? And that was a big raise for me. So I thought, oh, this is great. So I went in for the interview. I was already sold by the faculty member. The architect didn't know who else to hire. So he said, well, you come from, you know, I see your work. You seem like you're a good guy. I'm going to pay you X. And it was what I was making then. It was 20% of what he was getting paid. So I'm thinking, you know, just on principle alone, I was about ready to walk out because I thought, I'm going to do this work that he's doing or was going to do, and you're paying me a fraction of that. And my mind's processing all of it, and I'm thinking, this is an opportunity I would never get outside of the fact that they don't know who else to hire. I'm recommended, and you know, so I'll take it. Because I thought, I'm not out of anything. It's not about the money, because this project it's crazy. It's out of my range. So that experience, you know, they said, come on in and there's your drawing board. Remember, you know what I'm talking about, a drawing board? Or, you know, I had the architectural scales and all that, which I didn't know how to use. I had a drafting class in junior high. So I thought, well, I know a little bit about draft. I could probably figure it out. They gave me this stuff. I didn't even know what I was looking at. So I said, well, which architect will I be assisting? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, for the sign plan, the sign design. They're like, you're doing that. So I thought, I'm doing that. So I'm thinking, you're crazy. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't be hiring me. But I thought, okay, figure it out. So long story, but I did figure it out. So I would call a sign company and say, look, I'm in charge of doing this. What do I need to know in terms of material or scale or, you know, it's a hospital. So I would ask a lot of questions, That's number one, and figure it out. So you got to be bold enough to know what you don't know. And so the sign company would say, well, here's what we could do. We could do a mock-up out of plywood and we could drop it in front of where they're doing the construction. And you could look at it, you know, from a distance down the block and across. We could do reflective lighting. Well, how much does that cost? $700. It's a $2 million project. So I'd go to my boss at the time and say, I think we should make a prototype. How much does that cost? $700. I think that's a good deal. It's a $2 million. Well, you're brilliant. So, you know, that's what, and I'd go to the hospital and, you know, I would design a sign for code blue. I didn't even know what code blue was. And the doctors would say, well, that's too small. I'm thinking, yeah, but aesthetically, it's beautiful, isn't it? They say, yeah, but code blue is an emergency. It means someone's dying. That has got to be big and bright. And I thought, yeah, but, you know, it's kind of messing up my design aesthetic. But anyway, so again, it's like, good to know, good to know. Emergency, it's got to be seen by an ambulance, you know, at night from 2 blocks away. It's like, good to know. So that was a dream project, and it's like, I did it. So, you know, without knowing anything, and then a few years later, I don't remember exactly how this came about. I'm in Chicago working for a studio, and if you're into sports, you know, the Chicago Cubs, somehow I met someone that did a lot of work at Chicago Cubs, and I said something about the signage, that there's too many signs, it's ugly, you got too many signs. So take away half the signs and you could get them there just as well. So if somebody needs to go to the bathroom in the 3rd inning, you don't need 3 signs to get them there. Just take those 2 out, put one where it needs to be, and by the way, the aesthetic of your sign system doesn't match the arena. The arena was designed in 1927. You got fiberglass panels that look like they belong in a cheap airport. Why don't you make them out of steel and use a typeface that looks like it belongs in 1927? So they're like, oh, that's brilliant. How much would that? I'm thinking, I'll figure it out. So I walked around the stadium doing an audit of every sign. And then I came back, it's like, well, there's 2 you don't need, and if you can combine that one, and then we did prototypes and on and on. So it's like all of a sudden, I'm a signage designer, because of the one opportunity I could have walked away from because they didn't respect, and pay me what I should have been paid. And that helped me get my first real job, because the requirement to work a container was, it's not a first job. We're looking at a minimum of 5 years experience. I heard the guy say that when he came down to talk to us as students. And I wanted to work there. And I remember what he said. And I said to him, I remember when you said the requirement was 5 years of experience. I've got 2 years experience, but I designed a freaking science system for a hospital. That's better than doing mechanicals, in the back room of a publishing house, don't you think? He's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a quality of work. It's not necessarily, but everyone has a baseline, but you can challenge that. So those were dream jobs. The other one that comes to mind is there was a bank, talk a lot about MB Financial Bank, but it was a small bank, meaning $350 million in assets. It was an old bank, and it was just tired. It was just not a good, the identity was tired. Everything about it was tired. It was called Manufacturers Bank, which I said, are all your customers manufacturers? It's like, oh no, that goes back to like the 20s. Doesn't mean, so I thought there's lots of problems here. The young guy that took it over wanted to merge with another bank, and that bank was called Mid-City Bank. They were really tired. Old white guys running 2 banks, dressed the same, both had bad design, bad brand identities. And they're going to merge, so they need a new name, or at least they got to battle it out, decide who takes the name, which I thought, well, that's not going to go well, because you got 2 equal parties. No one's going to give up their name or their identity. They're going to fight that out. You end up with a stupid compromise. So it's like, we'll use our color and our name. And your name. This is what you see in corporate America. It's a corporate compromise. But I thought, not good. This should be more modern. So I'm thinking we should rename it MB. And they're going like, why? I'm thinking because it's the same initials. You don't have the same initials. Manufacturers Bank, Mid-City Bank. All in favor? And they're like, okay, we could do that. So I'm thinking, you're dark green, you're burgundy. Every bank is one of the 2, or maybe, blue, a deep blue. Why? Because they're conservative white males who can't think beyond that. And if you do something in red, they think, oh, that's not good because we're not in the red. We're not losing money. I said, stop saying that. It has nothing to do with anything. But it's a phrase that was kind of embedded in financial language. So anyway, long story short, they didn't have a lot of time because all the changes had to be in place in 3 or 4 months because there's regulations about that. So if you're going to merge a bank and you got to announce it by the end of the fiscal year, you got to have everything in place right away. So I used that to my advantage and I said, look, I can do all this. I could have a new name, new brand. I can have the system ready to go. Just trust me on this, and we're going to go red because orange is too avant-garde. So anyway, I sold them on red, sold them on MB Financial. Here's the big picture. I'm a young guy. They're saying like, okay, it makes sense. And I said, just trust me on this. Watch what happens. Anyway, we grew that bank to, $24.5 billion bank. We did everything for them. The phrase, the name, every sign. Remember the sign? What I learned because someone didn't know enough to really check out my portfolio. There's no signage in there, but trusted guy, I'll figure it out. Won't steer you wrong. So all of a sudden I'm doing everything for a bank from the ground up. They sold for $24.5 billion in 12 years. We did 130 banks, something like that. And I'm the same guy from Iowa. same guy, but it's like, you know, when you have that opportunity, do you rise to the occasion? Know what you don't know, ask those questions. So my dream projects even now are when someone will, you know, reach out and say, we want you to do this. You may not have exactly what we're looking for as far as what you've done before, but you know, we're going to put this on you. We're going to invest in you, because that I will not fail, because I know how much they're trusting me. I know what's at stake. So whenever a client steps in and says, we want to hire you, I'm as thankful as, because I said, you have many options. And the fact that you hire us, or that you allow me to do that for your company or your, that means a lot, because you have a lot at stake and you can't afford to be wrong. And by the way, I wouldn't take the job if I was going to be wrong. So I'm not bragging, but I'm going to, you made a good decision, and I will not rest or shortchange you. I'll put everything I got into it. And actually, it's kind of fun, you know. So.
Yeah. So sounds like you've been there and you've done that. And looking back, what do you define success in a design project?
This is off the top. Everyone's happy. So, in short, you know, I'm pleased with the outcome. So from a designer's point of view, a professional point of view, I know it's good work. And it's not just the look of it, right? It's that it solved the problem, or maybe even exceeded the expectation, which again it's kind of like, that's a big statement to make. But it also, the client is happy. And when the client's happy, it's usually because their customers are happy. So they're never quite sure. If I say, look, this is the way to go, they'll think, okay, you know, let's do it. You seem to know what you're doing. But when their customer's saying, love that, love everything about that. So MB is an example, is like, we changed the logo, we did everything right away. Did it feel, it felt good, but there's no data to support what we were doing was right. So a little bit, time goes by, and I say, well, what's the difference? People like it. They really like it. They call and say, we like that new thing. It doesn't, you know, and so that's what branding design is. It's how you feel about something, right? So there's a functional, like, yes, that will perform well, whether it's a website or a car or whatever, it's going to perform. There is ways to measure that, but ultimately it's how do you feel about it? And when a client feels good, and I feel good, that's the win. It's like, wow. And there is a lot of leap of faith and trust, and it's like, I wasn't so sure when you were saying red, but now that we did it, you know, you came through. And then, you know, I sleep well, because I think they trusted me to do it, I delivered on the promise, and it's pretty damn good. You know, if you look at the whole scheme, at least in how I evaluate good design or success. So it's got to work. And usually if we do our job well, they don't need us anymore. That's the tough part, because there's still work that we've done. And that's what this book is really about, is that work that I did. The first entry that you saw there was a record jacket that I designed as a student in 1982. And I was changing the office around, I had all this material, all these samples, and I found that record jacket for the jazz band that I did at Illinois, and I looked at it, I thought, this is pretty good. And I brought it out and I showed my design team, and I said, check this out. They said, what is it? I said, it's a record jacket. And they're like, you mean like vinyl? I'm thinking, yeah, like vinyl. It's like, oh, interesting. You know, I thought, no, I mean, you know what this is, right? And I said, well, check it. I mean, what do you think of the design? I said, well, that's pretty good. I thought, I think it's as good today as it was when I did it in '82. And that's what this book is attempting to show, is that good design transcends time and transcends application. So, you know, it was the right solution, well executed for what it was for.
So, you know, I teach typography class here at Bradley. How important is typography to graphic design? And how do you approach typography in your work?
Well, I think typography is critical to graphic design, but graphic design continues to evolve. So as you get into film and moving images and stuff, it's all kind of now, it's graphic. But as I mentioned, my first book that kind of changed my whole world was typography. It was basically Universe, black and white book by a Swiss designer, M.L. Reuter. So that's severe Swiss modern design, which I loved. And I never thought of typography being expressive. So within one font, basically, Reuter used one font through his entire career and could express so much, and in black and white. So I thought, wow, I kind of like that. It kind of suits me. Of course color's important, of course. And I pushed, whenever I would, in fact, I had a faculty member who had the rules of typography and said, never justify type, because you get all these imperfections in that evenness, that beautiful aesthetic that you like. By the way, no one cares about it but us. But anyway, but yeah, if you're a graphic designer, it's like, oh, that is so Wells, and you would never do justify. Well, I happen to know that particular faculty member, who was a friend of mine, I was a grad student, he designed a book some years ago that was completely justified. You know what I mean? Flush left, flush right. So I heard him tell this to another student group, like, never justify type. I'm thinking, but Dr. Colley, didn't you never justify type? Did you do a book back? He didn't appreciate the comment, by the way. But here's the thing. Never is no. There is no absolute, right? But there are certain principles about typography. And if you don't have that discipline or that desire, to appreciate the detail, the beauty of typography, doesn't matter what language you're talking about, then you're missing out on the mastery of graphic design. I think a faculty member might have told me this at one point, or I read it somewhere, but I mentioned in the book is that the difference between art and design, I think, is language, right? And it's also who are you designing it for versus an artist who is self-expression is often, the goal is to express something personal or point of view. My job is to express the point of view of the client, right? Which I'm totally satisfied with. So I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to make something, really great with, I want to use purple, It's like, it has nothing to do with the client, and it would be a disservice to do that. I like to design within the lane. What are the constraints? Give me the most tight constraint that you have. And that's where the beauty happens, right? That's where great design happens. It may not be obvious, it may not be the splash that, happens today, but over and over, the best designers I know demonstrate I got 2 colors to work with, 1 type font, and a limited budget. See what I did? I'm thinking, that is fantastic. It's fantastic. Because that takes real skill, so it's that, it's the Japanese samurai, right? So I was told, the samurai sword, there's only 10 Japanese that know how to do it, and they bend this steel 30,000 times, and it's the strongest steel in the world. It's like, that is so cool. So when you see, masterful typography, it's like, that is so beautiful. And I understand that most people can't appreciate, you go into an art museum, and the typical tourist might go by I don't like any of that. I don't understand it. Black on black, I could do that. I think, well, fair enough. And it's not for everybody, but if you understand the level to get there, to that kind of minimalist expression, it's amazing. But I understand that, it's not for everyone, like music or anything else. So typography or language is, to me, the difference between graphic design and art, or fine art, because it's essential in most of what we do. Now, I started in the print era, the golden era of graphic design, where everything had typography. It has, I think, advanced, where typography may not be a component of that, but typically it would be, right? So if you're looking at whether it's print or digital or commercial, whatever, typography is essential. but not necessarily in every case.
We are almost towards the end of the semester, and I see many students, especially in my class, talks about stress. I want to know, or can you tell us, when you have a creative block, how do you overcome that?
Well, it sounds like I'm a mutant, but I don't have a lot of creative blocks. And I don't know how do I explain that? I like, as I mentioned, I like narrowed constraints. I like we don't have a lot of time or a lot of money or a lot of options, or, oh, we've tried this, it doesn't work. I'm very comfortable in that. It's like, okay, let me narrow it down. And it's kind of like the Matrix, I think, sometimes, when you just kind of like see it. And I think it's by asking a lot of questions. It's looking, like, where have I been before? What does this remind me of? Or, so there might be a moment where I'm not sure what the answer is. And what I do is I step back from it. It's like, take a breath, change the pace. So you can't always just, sit there and think that it's going to happen. It doesn't always happen that way. One example is when my first real job was at Container Corporation America. Doesn't mean anything to you all, but it was a legendary graphic design center in Chicago. The best designers were there. And I got a job right out of school working for the master. His name was John Massey. He was like the coolest guy, and no one would go in there because he was an icon. Well, I'm from Iowa. I'm thinking, well, hey, we're not that different. By the way, John was the cartoonist, University of Illinois, so was I. He has a sense of humor. I think my cartooning was at least as good as his. And we kind of had that conversation. He liked baseball. I like baseball. So you figure out, like, okay, in all respect, of course, he's far beyond me. He's smarter than me and all that. But why doesn't anyone go in there and talk to him? Maybe he's a master designer and he's afraid of him. So my first project, which again I was not qualified to do this. So I get a job at the best place, and I think I'm going to do production. I'm going to assist somebody. First project was design a series of posters. And I thought, for the company, this is the place. This is like, I think, okay. And so I copied, I mimicked, like what John would do or Container would do. It's like, I'll do a abstract, geometric, sans serif. I'll make it look like it came from Container. I can do that. And so I'm doing these posters, and John would come out every now and then, like, Grady, how's it going? I'm thinking, it's going okay. I'm working it out. It's like, okay, yeah, good, And at one point I said, I'm not sure, John, if, he's like, well, why do you think we hired you? And I thought, well, because you're capable, you're good, we get it. So, we're not, you're saying we're making a bad decision? I think, okay, confidence, you can do it. Anyway, one of the three, I just couldn't figure out why it wasn't right. So these geometric shapes, and I'm doing this simple composition, and it just wasn't great. I didn't know why it wasn't great. And I, tapped on the door, and John's like, hey, what's going on? And, can I show you? He's like, bring it in. So he said, what are you trying to do? And I said, I'm trying, and he's just listening. And then he said, well, hold it up. And I'll put this down for a minute. So he goes like this. And I looked at his gesture, and I looked at the composition. I thought, that is it. So he said, just move those two things apart a little bit, and you activate the whole negative space, and then you got a composition. It's successful. I thought, that's why he's a genius. He's a genius. But once I learned that, I thought, always look at the negative space, because, and I try to share this with designers who work for me, is sometimes it's just a little move. You got to try it. You can always go back. So it's and I love this stuff. It's like, if you like the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards, Keith Richards, he's like, my man. Keith talked about guitar riffs, and like, I got those, no satisfaction, whatever. Bum, 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 da-da. He said it's the space between the notes. That's what it's about. It's the space between the notes. It's like what you're not playing is where it happens. And I thought, oh, John Massey said it's the space between the shapes. So, life, if you can assimilate all these things you heard, seen, did, and I have ability to do that. It's kind of a silly place in my head sometimes, but I make all these connections, and that's why the creative block doesn't happen, because and I've done some teaching, and I'm talking about, remember that scene in Star Wars? Or, point of reference, and they're like, yeah, well, that's kind of what this is like. So, or I would give an example, like, remember the Keith Richards thing about it's between the notes? Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So it's the lines between, that's like, oh, okay. So sometimes you can relate, sometimes you can't. But I've always been able to make all these crazy connections about what I've seen, heard, smelled, or whatever. Or it's like the Beat Bobby Flay show. Remember when Bobby Flay did that? That's just like what this is right here. So that's why for me, it's sometimes I don't know the answer, and what I tell designers, what I do, is you design it, you feel you're satisfied. Don't sleep on it, actually. Step away, come back, look at it fresh in the morning. If you love it, we're done. But if you look at it and think, not loving it yet, we're probably not done. So sometimes you have to step away, you fall in love with something, you think you're done. I say, just give it one more step back. Maybe you're right, maybe I'm right. And then come back the next day and look at it again, like, is that everything it could be? And you just kind of know it. And don't fight your feelings if you're thinking like, it's pretty good. Think, are you okay with that? It's pretty good? Good enough? If you're okay with good enough, okay. But I usually, and most of the work you see here, I'm satisfied with. So even though I had to go back and recreate it digitally, because I didn't want to have a bunch of old work, second-rate photographs of old work, it took a lot of work to recreate it in a digital form, because remember, like the record, it didn't exist. But I didn't change much. I did cheat a little bit, some that are like, oh, I'm gonna move that just a little over like that, because I have a one more chance. But for the most part, it's pretty much done. You don't need to go back.
So I have just time for 2 more questions before I let you go and have a Q&A with the students. It's a little bit about future, of course. You've seen and you've worked with your hands, and you went through the digital era, digital revolution, now with AI. How do you see graphic design evolving in the future?
Well, it's a big unknown really for me, but we talked about this briefly today. I went into design very enthusiastic because it hadn't changed in 100 years. It was a print, medium, and we did advertising and brochures and reports and signs and physical things, which we all loved, and that's why we went into graphic design. There was a craft. I was taught as a craftsman, so handset type. I could take an X-Acto knife and split a 1-point rule. One of our first projects was to take a ruling pen, which none of you know. So a ruling pen is a little like an adapter. I mean, it's a medieval tool, and you drop ink in there. It's a little pinch thing. You tighten it just enough till you get the perfect stroke of a line. And we were really good at it. And one of my first classes was take the ruling pen and make it, a 1/2-point rule thickness consistently with 1/2-inch squares on a grid on a piece of board. And they have to be exactly right. So I'm going to measure the teacher would say, I'm going to measure every unit, and I'm going to look at every thickness. And then, by the way, after you do that, and hopefully it doesn't bleed on you because it will, it will bleed and it's a disaster. And then take the pen from one corner to the next and perfectly intersect the squares. Every student, including me, hated that teacher. None of them were perfect, but we were close. I mean, a few of us were close. And even to this day, I'm thinking, I never cut myself with an X-Acto knife, you know? And so I like that tool. I like that physical, like zip, zip, zip. I like all the, I can cut, I can draw. I miss that, you know? And I find ways of doing it. You know, sometimes I get out the scissors just for the sound, you know? But in 84, 85, I was already starting to work in design. And, you know, the Mac showed up, right? So Apple showed up. I was a young designer. The old designers refused, like, this is not good. This is a horrible idea. And I didn't know how to work it, but I was, you know, like, well, what does this mean? And here's a little side story. So before the Mac came out, the year of, I think, I was at a film producer, graphic designer, pretty big name in New York City. I was taking a tour of his studios. And he was doing amazing things for Paramount Pictures, all this big stuff that if you've seen movies from the 70s, you would have recognized. And we're walking out of one of the studio spaces, and in the corner is a guy with an Apple, well, I don't know if it was an Apple computer, but he's doing the Apple, which started out as a rainbow of colors, and he was assigning a tone to each color. Boom, boom, dun, dun. And I thought, what is that? He says, oh, it's a little company called Apple Computer, and we're trying to assign a tone to the colors. I thought, oh, that's fun. That was it. I mean, that was even before. So then the Mac comes out, and we're all like, oh, we don't need that. A guy named Milton Glaser, a legendary graphic designer, was asked, are you going to get a computer? This was like in the 80s. He said, the typewriter never improved the quality of poetry. And I thought, that's beautiful, that's well said. So I think of it that way. You know, the technology was brutal. It put thousands of people out of work. Anyone that was in the printing industry eventually is gone, or you had to totally relearn. But it's strong stuff. It's harsh to go through that change because you want to hang on to the romance. You want to hang on to all the craft and the physical and the smell and the blood and the chemicals. You want to be in the dark room. Really bad for your health. Couldn't have been happier. So like digital photography, like terrible idea. It's grainy. It's, everyone's going to be a photographer. Yes, they are. And so with the transition, technology unfortunately leads design. And design suffers, in my view, suffers for it because they have to catch up to the advancements of the technology. Now, to talk about, I only work with film, it's like, are you crazy? You could do it so much better with digital, and you can. Because someone doesn't want to release what we love, it's the romance of it, right? So that's what technology does, and that's what I've learned is, of course, and the technology, and whether it's the internet, we're doing websites, we're not designing anything in print, we're designing websites, which is frustrating for me because it's like, well, that looks great on a laptop, but it doesn't look good on a phone. I'm thinking, damn, you didn't have to deal with this before. You design a book, it looks good no matter who holds it. So it can be frustrating and all of that, and there's going to be frustrating for you because the acceleration of the disruption of technology is crazy fast. So whatever you're learning now is going to be, not for me, maybe 20 years, maybe 5. You're going to be, now what, now what, now what? The beauty of it is it's, a creative mind, with, you not only adapt, but you embrace it and say, bring it on. I don't want to lose, and I don't have to lose everything that I know from the world of craft and that kind of learning, slow it down, look at it. Just because you can do it doesn't mean it's good. And there are times where you want to rely on human intelligence. But AI, I mean, already I've seen enough. It's like, is that from AI? Or there was just something in the news yesterday about which performer, was it hip hop performer, something like that was an AI. Did you guys see that? Drake. I don't even know what that's about yet, but I saw the headline yesterday. It's like, this is a problem. I mean, potentially it's a problem. Because you won't even know what you're looking at, whether it was, but I think, okay, that doesn't sound good. I don't want to be in that world. But we thought the same thing when the Mac showed up. We thought this is the end. You're going to get nothing but crap design. You know, you're going to get people that aren't qualified doing all kinds of things. I was teaching design at that time. And I thought, you know, you really should learn how to use metal type because that gives you the sensitivity and the language and the history. Once you learn that way, you'll know, you know, in the future when it's not right. If you don't know how to see, you don't know how to do. You know, if you don't understand the background, how can you apply it to the foreground? And AI is that same thing. It's like, I have no idea where it's going. It's scary in a way, and you feel for the artists who think, well, you know, they can just replicate my, you know, Renaissance style Drake, and boom, it's like, that's cool. And now I'm an artist. It's like, well, you know, it's all being redefined. And how do we fit in, you know, as designers, as artists? And I'm banking on the fact that there is a need to have human, you know, leadership and opinion and engagement, because you get all the sameness, and that's what technology gives you. And then you get the beauty of, you know, a person coming in saying, look, you know, here's the way to go. Sometimes simple is better. And in some ways, I think it's a little idealistic, but print is crawling back in some ways because of the technology, the lack of tactile connection. So it's like when you hand someone a book and say, just take a time out, sit down and change the pace, feel the paper, smell the ink, and it's kind of like, wow, this is euphoric. You know, it's like a new thing. So there's, you know, a little bit of that. There's still publishers who are doing great books and, you know, music that sometimes you want to go to an actual concert as opposed to a virtual experience.
I mean, there's so many questions that I want to ask him, but for the given time, I also want to give you guys an opportunity to ask some questions. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand, and I will relay this mic to you. Any burning questions? This is a really good opportunity.
I'd be the same way, you know, I wouldn't ask questions. But remember what I said when this guy came to our school and someone asked him, what do you look for in a graphic designer? And he said, 5 years minimum experience. I remember that for 2 years when I interviewed him. I said, well, I thought about that. Is that really what you meant? Because he forgot he even said it. But yeah, I'll answer any question.
Sophia, yeah.
Did you have any moments throughout your career where you felt, I suppose the term is like imposter syndrome type, where you just felt, oh, I'm with these really skilled people and look at all, you know, when you were younger, I suppose. How did you overcome that? How did you continue, you know, from that feeling of just doubt?
That I was surrounded by what?
Just very skilled people, and you look at yourself and maybe you weren't as experienced.
Oh, that happens all the time. So, again, you know, remember where I'm from. I'm from Iowa, right? And by the way, you don't do a lot of bragging. I mean, no one's any different than anyone else in Iowa. So you might say, well, you know, he's a multi-millionaire. He owns the Chevrolet company. It's like, no, I didn't. All I know is he can't play pool. So there's a certain, you know, if you have a humble approach, obviously, you know, there's going to be people around you that are more skilled or talented. And here's the truth. My design team is more skilled than I am in terms of technology. So my role now is like the producer I mentioned, not by name, but in New York. He was the orchestrator. He was the director. He had the ideas. And so my role on the team is I know, you know, which way to go often. We certainly have a opportunity to exchange ideas because I'm not always right. And I'm always thinking, who's got the best idea? It may not even be the designer. So I tend to orchestrate the conversation, and I know I kind of have a vision. It's like, okay, this is, a way we should go. Everyone agree. But the execution now, I no longer am needed from an X-Acto knife point of view. That's just for me to show off, like the old Yoda. It's like, look at this. It's like, has no value, but that's cool. But my designers are very nimble. And so it's like, I saw you do that, can you edit this video? And it's like, yeah, sure. And it's like, that is great. But I know what makes a good video. So let's change the pace of that. Let's bring that in. So I'm directing the photography, I'm directing the design, and that's what I do well. If you want me to hop on the computer and execute, you better ask one of my team members, because they can do it faster and probably better than me. So in every environment, whether it's client or whatever, in fact, I tell clients, you understand what you do. I have worked in that business for many years, but I'm relying on you for direction because this is your thing. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions about that. So, I can't speak like they do with authority, but I've been around enough where it's kind of like, oh, so that's kind of like that, right? It's like, yeah, like what's venture capital again and mezzanine funds versus hedge funds and private equity? And they're like, oh, it's very different, very the same. So it's like, I need to ask questions. I am surrounded by smarter people, which is a good thing, often more skilled.
I think that's what Steve Jobs always said, surround yourself by other people who know more than you do.
So we have one more question.
What piece of advice would you give to graduating students? Like, we're going right to the field. What would you say for us, like, accomplish what we want to accomplish?
Be bold. Go. I was told the job I mentioned earlier, which was the dream job. My first job was the dream job. And I was told by a very knowledgeable expert designer that that's not a first job. Don't even bother, no matter how good you are. And I thought, really? Because the guy that I mentioned earlier that said he looked for 5, he was from Des Moines, Iowa. Actually, he was born in Missouri and went to Drake in Des Moines. I knew, it's like, we're not that different. And what he said about 5 years, he didn't really mean that. It wasn't 5 years. It's like, we need experience. We want someone that isn't, like right out of the nest. So my advice number 1 is go for it. Don't be afraid to stretch. Don't sell yourself short. You may not have all the qualifications. You may not have everything that you think they're asking for, but have a conversation. Because the people I hire are people, I look for the individual first. Who are they? Where are they from? I mentioned to Chae earlier, one of my best designers I hired out of an Irish bar. She was a printmaker major at the Art Institute. I knew that. But everyone liked Emma. She's just a go-getter, she's smart, she's likable. Yes, she has, printmaking degree, but I'm thinking, I'm not looking for a printmaker. But we had a conversation, I just try it out, come on in. Now, I know not many employers would do what I do, but from your angle, see how far you can go. So if you're thinking, I'd like to work for do film, I'd like to work for Paramount or Netflix or whatever, look into it, try it. It's like, maybe I'll move to California or New Jersey or India or something like that. So this is the time, think about where you are. Very low responsibilities, I assume most of you, and you might owe some money for your education, whatever, but you freedom to try, to move it around and be told no, and don't, if you are told like, look, we're way beyond what you're looking, or what we're looking for something else, that's not a bad thing. Come back. Say, what are you looking for exactly? because you'll see me in a couple years. By the way, as an employer, I like that. It's like, I want to work for you. Because if I ask them, what do you know about me? What do you know about the firm? And they'll say, well, I looked it up on the internet and it looks like you do, you know, stuff in banking. And they can, you know what? This is going to be a hard sell. Because it's like dating. I want you to be into me before I'm into you. So you got to tell me something that catches my attention. It's like, I really like what you said, or I really, you know, I've followed you for a while, don't mean creepy way. But you know what I mean? So if you're going to interview, if you want someone to be interested in talking to you, you have to know who you're talking to, right? So it's like, I know this about you and this and that. So I do that with every potential client. If they reach out and say, hey, we're thinking about hiring someone like you, first thing I do is try to learn about them. So I could have a conversation. Not that I know everything, but at least, yeah, you're in the aerodynamics and, you know, and by the way, I look up the person too. It's like, oh, you're from Iowa. Yeah, or, hey, I noticed your name was Kennedy. Are you Irish? And by the way, that you're already halfway in. If you could say, yeah, I'm Irish, like, oh, we're already friends. But, so this is my advice is, think big. This, you can take a chance now. You know, there's no reason. Don't be intimidated because you're not good enough, you're not ready. Go for it. I mean, jump in. It's like, they'll tell you if you're not ready, but also do your homework. Know, you know, why you're having this interview. Don't think of it as a job. Think of it as a life choice, a career choice. So maybe this will be your last stop, maybe it won't. Chances are it won't. But go into it as if it is. You know, like, this is where I want to be. That dream job I told you about, I thought, why would I ever leave here? 3 years in, I'm thinking, I gotta go. Because of other things that came up, other opportunities. And when you get involved in something, you find out the reality is, it's not everything that I thought it was. It's great. And the other thing is, if you're not happy, it's your own fault. So move on. Don't blame the employer. Don't blame, oh, they're not what I thought they were. You took the job, and I think the same thing is, if I give someone a job or someone gives me a job, that's a gift. I didn't have to do that, and they didn't have to do that. So I expect, you know, as long as you work for me, you're going to give me your best. You know, that's the deal, and I'll give you the best. But at some point, you might decide, or I might decide to move on. It's perfectly normal. We've all done that, right? So you're looking at 3 guys that moved on to something. But it was always, you know, because of a choice. You know, we want to move on to something else.
One last question, Paige.
Yeah, this is coming from a freelance graphic designer. How many signs did you have to design for the hospital job?
I don't know. It was a 6-story. Hmm?
Was it 1,000?
No. Probably. It's a 6-story hospital, and the signs were mostly exterior, which only a handful.
Okay.
And then interior, you know, just the main directional kind of like room. There's a system, you know.
Yeah.
So nothing like that. The Wrigley Field was by far more.
Really?
Wrigley Field was crazy, which, you know, by the way, so here's what it means. Like, you know, all the things that I think are important stories, when I tell guys like, well, you know, I did the signs at Wrigley Field, they're like, you did? And by the way, they look like they were designed in 1927. The whole idea there was, I'm not important. What I was trying to do was get rid of the signs that, you know, are in conflict. Some designer got carried away or didn't know what he was doing, or she. Design the signs. The signs are only there for information reasons. They're not to show off. Think of what's the purpose of it. So let's make them feel like they're integrated into the structure. 3 years ago, or 2, they changed all the signs. So I can't say that anymore. It's like, what'd you ever do, Kerry? And it's like, well, I did do the signs at Wrigley Field. It's like, wow, that's cool. And now it's like, well, I did do the signs at Wrigley Field, but they're gone. So I don't really have anything left that you can see or do. And that's a normal thing too. You know, time catches on and, you know, it's a job.
Well, thank you so much for coming all the way from Chicago to Raleigh to talk to us once again. We thank you so much. We value your presence here. Once again, I thank you, all of you here, for joining us this weather. But I think it was definitely worthwhile. And thank you so much for joining this lecture series.
Thank you, everyone.